It was a quiet morning at St. Clair's Hospital. The waiting area smelled of disinfectant and coffee. Nurses walked quickly through the halls, doctors checked reports, and patients waited silently for their turn. Everything seemed normal, until the glass doors slid open and a young woman rushed inside. She looked tired, her hair messy, and her clothes were covered with dry blood. In her arms, she carried a small baby wrapped in a blanket. The nurse at the counter jumped up, shocked. "Please help. My baby is not breathing." The woman cried. Her voice was shaky, her face pale, and her eyes filled with panic. The nurses immediately called the emergency team. Within seconds, 2 doctors appeared and took the baby from her arms. The woman collapsed into a chair, shaking. Tears ran down her cheeks as she kept whispering, "Please, save my baby. Please." The doctors worked fast. After a few moments, the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. Everyone sighed in relief. The woman covered her mouth, crying again, this time from joy. "Your baby is breathing," the nurse told her softly. But something about the woman didn't seem right. Her hands were trembling too much. Her eyes looked lost. The nurse asked for her ID and some papers. The woman froze. I left everything at home," she said quickly. "It all happened so fast. What's your name, ma'am?" The nurse asked again. "Emily Sanders," she replied after a pause. The nurse nodded but noticed the hesitation. Still, she didn't want to question a new mother in distress. She handed the woman a glass of water and asked her to wait while the baby was taken to the maternity ward. For the next hour, Emily sat quietly, staring at the floor. Her fingers tapped against the chair. Every few minutes, she looked toward the hallway where the baby had been taken. She looked nervous, as if she was waiting for something, or hiding something. Then, 2 police officers entered the hospital. They walked straight to the reception desk. "We're looking for a woman who came in with a newborn," one of them said. "There's been a report of a missing pregnant woman nearby." The nurse's eyes widened. She pointed toward Emily. The officers approached her slowly. "Ma'am, may we speak with you for a moment?" one of them asked politely. Emily stood up quickly, holding her bag tightly. "Why? What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking again. "There's an investigation," the officer replied. "We just need to ask a few questions." Emily looked around the room, her breathing getting faster. Everyone's eyes were on her now. Her hands clenched the straps of her bag. Then, without warning, she ran. "Stop her!" one of the officers shouted. Nurses screamed as Emily pushed past them and sprinted toward the exit. The officers followed, their footsteps echoing through the hallway. Outside, the morning sun was rising. Emily stumbled through the parking lot, her heart pounding. She looked back once and saw the officers chasing her. She turned the corner and disappeared behind the hospital. Minutes later, the police found her near a dumpster, crying and covered in sweat. When they checked her bag, they found blood-stained clothes and a knife. Inside the hospital, one of the officers got a radio call. The missing woman had been found, dead, in her apartment. Her stomach had been cut open. The truth hit them like a storm. The baby Emily had brought wasn't hers. She had ripped it from another woman's body. As the officers handcuffed her, Emily whispered, "I just wanted to be a mother." Her voice broke into sobs. The crowd watched in silence. The baby, now safe in the hospital, cried softly in the next room. No one could believe it. The woman who walked into the hospital asking for help was the monster behind the crime. The police car stopped in front of the gray brick station. Emily sat in the back seat, her hands handcuffed, eyes red from crying. Her hair fell across her face, and she looked nothing like the panicked mother who had rushed into the hospital just an hour ago. Now she looked empty, like a person whose soul had been taken away. Detective Laura Hayes stood near the door, watching as the officers brought Emily inside. Laura had seen many criminals in her 12 years on the force, but something about this case felt different. "A stolen baby," she murmured, shaking her head. And the real mother, dead. Inside the interrogation room, Emily sat silently. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the cold metal table. Laura entered with a file in her hand and sat down across from her. "Emily Sanders," Laura began. "Is that your real name?" Emily didn't answer. She kept staring at the table. "Do you know a woman named Sarah Miller?" Laura asked, opening the file. "She was 8 months pregnant. Her body was found in her apartment. Her baby is alive, and that baby was with you." Emily finally looked up. Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she whispered. "I just wanted my baby." Laura leaned forward. "You wanted your baby or hers?" Emily shook her head, crying harder. "You don't understand. I was supposed to have a baby, but I lost her." Laura stayed silent, letting her talk. "I had a miscarriage 6 months ago," Emily continued in a shaky voice. "I didn't tell my husband. He wanted a family so badly. When I lost the baby, I thought he'd leave me. I kept pretending that I was still pregnant." Laura's eyes narrowed. "So you faked the pregnancy?" Emily nodded slowly. "I even wore fake belly pads. I bought them online. Everyone believed me. Even my husband. He painted the nursery. He talked to the baby every night. He loved her before she even existed." There was a long pause. "And then," Emily said quietly, "my due date came closer. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't keep lying forever. That's when I met Sarah." Laura flipped through the photos in the file. Sarah Miller, 28 years old. She posted online about her pregnancy. "You met her there, didn't you?" "Yes," Emily admitted. "We talked in a mom group. She was kind. She said I could visit her sometime. I told her I was also expecting a baby. She invited me over one day. She was alone. Her husband was working in another city." Her voice started to tremble again. "I went to her house with a gift for the baby. We had tea. She told me she was due in 2 weeks. And then she said something that broke me. She said, 'You're lucky, Emily. You're going to be such a good mom.'" Emily's eyes went blank as she remembered the moment. "I don't know what happened next," she whispered. "Something inside me snapped. I just remember the knife and her screams. And then silence." Laura closed the file slowly. The room went quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. "You took the baby," Laura said softly. Emily nodded. "She was crying. I thought if I saved her, she'd be mine. I wrapped her in a blanket and ran. I told myself it wasn't murder. It was love." Laura stood up. "Love doesn't leave someone bleeding on the floor." As officers came to take Emily back to her cell, she looked up and said one last thing. "I didn't plan it. But when I held that baby, it felt like she was meant to be mine." Laura watched her go, her heart heavy. She had heard confessions before. Cold, calculated, emotionless. But this one was different. It was madness wrapped in sorrow. Later that night, Laura visited the hospital nursery. The baby lay peacefully in a crib, tiny hands moving in sleep. "You're safe now," Laura whispered, but deep down she knew. This story was far from over. There were still questions no one could answer. Who was Emily Sanders before she became a killer? And what other secrets was she still hiding? It was just after midnight when Detective Laura Hayes drove through the quiet streets of Maplewood. The yellow streetlights reflected off the wet road as rain began to fall softly. She was on her way to meet David Sanders, Emily's husband. The case had already shocked the town. News channels called it the stolen baby case. People couldn't stop talking about the woman who walked into a hospital pretending to be a mother. But Laura knew there was more to the story. There always was. David lived in a small blue house at the end of a silent street. When Laura knocked, he opened the door slowly. His eyes were tired and his face looked pale, like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Detective Hayes?" he asked quietly. "Yes, Mr. Sanders," she replied, showing her badge. "May I come in?" He nodded and stepped aside. The living room was neat but cold, filled with baby things. Toys, diapers, tiny clothes, and a half-painted pink wall. On a small table sat a picture of Emily and David, smiling together. They looked happy. Laura took a deep breath. "Mr. Sanders, are you aware that your wife has been arrested?" David sank onto the couch. "Yes," he whispered. "The police called me. I still can't believe it." "She's being charged with the murder of Sarah Miller," Laura said gently, "and for kidnapping the baby." David buried his face in his hands. "She told me we were going to have a baby," he said, his voice breaking. "She showed me sonograms. She said the baby was due this month. I built a crib with my own hands." Laura leaned forward. "Did you ever go with her to the hospital for checkups?" He hesitated. "No. She said she wanted to go alone. She said the doctor made her nervous around men." That was the first red flag. "Mr. Sanders," Laura asked carefully, "did she ever show you medical papers, prescriptions, anything?" He looked down, thinking. "No, I never questioned her. I trusted her. She looked pregnant. She acted like a mother. She even talked to the baby every night." Laura took out a photo of Sarah Miller. "Do you recognize this woman?" David stared at the picture for a long moment. "Yes," he said slowly. "She came here once. About 2 weeks ago." Laura's eyes widened. "She came here?" "Yes," David said. "Emily told me she was a friend from an online mom group. They talked about baby clothes. She was nice. I remember she brought a little stuffed bear for our baby." The detective's heart tightened. That bear was now sitting in the nursery, beside the crib that would never be used. After that visit, David continued, Emily changed. She became quieter. She cried at night when she thought I was asleep. I asked her what was wrong, but she just said, "Everything will be okay soon." I thought she was nervous about the delivery. Laura closed her notebook slowly. The pieces were starting to connect. Emily's fake pregnancy, the meeting with Sarah, and the sudden violence. "Mr. Sanders," Laura said softly, "your wife lost a baby 6 months ago. Did you know that?" David looked up sharply. "What? No, that's not possible. She was still pregnant when—" He stopped mid-sentence. His face turned white. The truth was hitting him like a wave. Laura nodded gently. "I'm sorry. She never told you. She was scared you'd leave her." David stood up, shaking his head. "Leave her? I loved her. We could have tried again. She didn't need to do this." His voice broke completely. He sat down again, silent tears falling. Laura looked around the house, the baby things, the photos, the unfinished nursery. Every object was proof of Emily's lie, built carefully over months. Before leaving, she asked one last question. "Mr. Sanders, did your wife ever mention anything about hearing voices or seeing things?" He hesitated again. "Sometimes," he said slowly. "At night she would whisper to the baby even before she was showing. Once I woke up and heard her say, 'You'll come to me no matter what.' It scared me." Laura nodded. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Sanders. You've helped a lot." As she walked back to her car, she looked up at the dark sky. The rain had stopped, but something colder filled the air. A truth still hiding in the shadows. Emily wasn't just broken by grief. She was consumed by it. And now Detective Laura Hayes knew that the real mystery wasn't just how Emily killed Sarah Miller, but why she believed that baby truly belonged to her. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, The Past That Created the Monster, next, revealing Emily's childhood, her trauma, and how her obsession began? The next morning, Detective Laura Hayes sat in her office staring at Emily's file. It was thick, filled with photos, medical records, and police reports. She had spent all night going through it, but one thing was clear. Emily Sanders wasn't born a killer. She was made into one. The story began years before the murder. Emily grew up in a small town called Riverfield, a quiet place with long roads, broken fences, and people who didn't talk much. Her childhood was lonely. Her mother, Patricia, worked double shifts at a diner, and her father, Rick, was a drunk who came home angry almost every night. When Emily was just 8, she learned what fear meant. She'd hide under her bed when her parents fought. The sound of smashing bottles and her mother's screams echoed through the walls. Sometimes Emily's father would storm into her room, shouting nonsense, accusing her of being the reason for his bad luck. At school, she was quiet. Too quiet. Teachers said she was sweet but distant. She never smiled in class pictures. She never had close friends. Instead, she drew pictures of mothers and babies. A woman holding a child, smiling, safe. When she turned 16, her mother got sick. Cancer. The medical bills drained everything they had. Her father disappeared for days at a time, leaving Emily to take care of her mother alone. One night, Patricia held Emily's hand and whispered, "Don't be like me, baby. Find someone who loves you and gives you the family I couldn't." 2 months later, her mother was gone. Emily was left alone in the house, an empty home filled with memories and silence. Years passed. Emily moved to the city and tried to build a normal life. She worked at a bakery, met David at a coffee shop, and for the first time she felt something close to happiness. David was kind, soft-spoken, and always patient. He made her laugh, something she hadn't done in years. They married within a year. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Emily thought her curse was finally broken, but when she got pregnant, something changed. It was as if her entire world revolved around that baby. She decorated the nursery, talked to her belly, and even played lullabies at night. She told everyone that this baby would be her reason to live. Then came the tragedy. At 6 months, she lost the baby. The doctors said her body couldn't handle the stress, that she needed rest and therapy. But Emily didn't listen. She locked herself in the nursery for hours, whispering to the empty crib. When David tried to talk to her, she smiled strangely and said, "She's still here. I can feel her." From that moment, reality started to blur for Emily. She began buying baby clothes again, telling neighbors the due date had been pushed forward. She even posted online about her pregnancy journey. That's how she found Sarah Miller, a cheerful young woman who reminded Emily of everything she'd lost. In the interrogation room, Laura placed an old photo on the table, a little girl with dark hair holding a doll. It was Emily at age 7. "Emily," Laura said softly. "Do you remember her?" Emily looked at the picture, her eyes glassy. "She just wanted a family," she whispered. Laura nodded. "And you thought if you had a baby you could fix that pain?" Emily smiled faintly, a broken kind of smile. "Babies don't leave. They don't shout. They just love you." The room went silent. Laura watched her carefully. There was no anger in Emily's face, only sadness, confusion, and something deeper. Emptiness. Later that day, Laura closed the file and leaned back in her chair. She finally understood the truth. Emily wasn't just a murderer. She was the result of years of pain, neglect, and a desperate hunger for love. Still, understanding didn't mean forgiving, because no matter how broken Emily was, Sarah Miller was gone forever, and the baby, innocent, fragile, unaware, had survived a nightmare she'd never remember. As Laura looked out the window at the gray afternoon sky, one thought haunted her. Sometimes monsters are not born in darkness. Sometimes they are created by the world's silence. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the front rows, their cameras flashing as Emily Sanders was led in wearing a pale gray prison uniform. Her hands were cuffed, her hair tied back loosely. She looked thinner, quieter, almost invisible. But when she entered, the entire room fell silent. Detective Laura Hayes sat near the front, watching closely. Months of investigation had led to this moment. She had seen many trials before, cold-blooded killers, greedy thieves, vengeful lovers, but this one was different. This was the story of a woman who had killed for love, or something she believed was love. The judge entered, the crowd stood, and the trial began. The prosecutor started first. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a voice that echoed through the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pointing toward Emily, "this woman murdered Sarah Miller in cold blood. She cut open her victim's body and stole her unborn baby. That's not desperation. That's evil." Gasps filled the room. Emily stared down at her hands. She didn't look up. The prosecutor continued, showing photos. Sarah's smiling face, the crime scene, the blood-stained knife. "This is not the act of a grieving mother," he said. "It's the act of a monster." When it was the defense's turn, Emily's lawyer, a calm woman named Rachel Moore, stood up. Her tone was soft but firm. "Emily Sanders is not a monster," she said. "She is a broken soul, a woman destroyed by grief and untreated mental illness. What she did was terrible, but it was not planned murder. It was the act of someone who lost her mind. Rachel turned toward Emily. "Mrs. Sanders, please tell the court what happened that day." Emily slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red, tired, but strangely clear. "I didn't want to kill her," she said in a trembling voice. "Sarah was my friend. She was happy. She had everything I lost. I went to her house to give her a gift. But when I saw her belly, I heard a voice." The courtroom went silent. "What voice?" Rachel asked softly. Emily looked straight ahead. "My baby's voice. She said, 'Mommy, take me. I'm here.' It was so real. I thought God was giving me a second chance." The prosecutor stood quickly. "You expect us to believe that?" Emily turned to him, her expression calm, almost peaceful. "You don't have to believe it. I believed it." The judge motioned for order. Then Rachel presented new evidence. Emily's psychiatric records from years ago. The documents revealed a history of hallucinations, depression, and trauma therapy after her mother's death. Her therapist had warned that Emily might lose touch with reality under emotional stress. Laura watched as the puzzle pieces came together. The woman who murdered Sarah Miller wasn't a cold killer. She was trapped inside her own broken mind. Still, the horror of what she'd done couldn't be ignored. The trial went on for weeks. Doctors, psychologists, and witnesses took the stand. David Sanders, Emily's husband, testified with tears in his eyes. "I wish I had seen the signs," he said quietly. "Maybe I could have stopped her." When the time came for the verdict, the courtroom was tense. The judge looked at Emily. "This court finds the defendant, Emily Sanders." The room seemed to freeze. "Guilty of manslaughter due to diminished mental capacity." A wave of whispers filled the air. Emily wouldn't face the death penalty. Instead, she'd spend years in a psychiatric prison under treatment and supervision. Emily looked strangely relieved. She turned to Rachel and whispered, "Maybe now I can rest." As she was escorted out, she looked back once, her eyes searching for something or someone. Laura met her gaze. For a brief second, she didn't see a murderer. She saw a lost child. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. "Detective Hayes, do you think justice was served?" Laura paused before answering. "Justice," she said quietly. "Maybe, but peace? I don't think anyone will ever have that." That night, as rain fell again, Laura visited the hospital one last time. The baby, now 5 months old, was being adopted by Sarah Miller's sister. The little girl smiled when Laura touched her tiny hand. "She's safe now," the nurse said softly. Laura nodded, but her thoughts were far away. Somewhere in a gray cell, Emily Sanders was probably talking to the air, still whispering to a baby that never existed. And for the first time, Laura wondered if monsters were born from darkness, or from heartbreak too deep for the world to understand. 5 years had passed since the shocking trial of Emily Sanders. The story that once shook the nation had slowly faded from the headlines. The public moved on, the cameras disappeared, and the world forgot. But Detective Laura Hayes never could. She still remembered every detail. The blood on Emily's hands, her trembling voice in the courtroom, and those haunting words. "I just wanted to be a mother." Now, 5 years later, Laura sat at her desk on a rainy afternoon, sipping cold coffee and reading through old files. It had been a long week of routine cases, nothing like the Sanders case. She thought she'd left that chapter behind, until the phone rang. "Detective Hayes," she answered. A young nurse's voice came through, shaky and nervous. "Detective, I think you need to see something. It's about Emily Sanders." Laura's heart skipped a beat. "What about her?" "She's been talking again," the nurse said. "And she says she wants to confess something new." Later that evening, Laura drove to Riverwood Psychiatric Facility, where Emily had been kept since her sentencing. The building was surrounded by high fences and quiet woods, the kind of place where broken minds were locked away. When Laura entered, the air smelled of medicine and bleach. A guard led her to a small visiting room. On the other side of the glass sat Emily Sanders. She looked older, her hair streaked with gray, her skin pale. But her eyes, They still carried the same strange calmness Laura remembered. "Hello, Detective," Emily said softly with a faint smile. "Emily," Laura replied, sitting down. "You wanted to see me?" Emily nodded. "Yes. I need to tell you the truth. The real truth." Laura frowned. "You already confessed, Emily. You killed Sarah Miller. You took her baby. What else is there to say?" Emily leaned closer to the glass. Her eyes glimmered with something almost childlike. "It wasn't my first time," Laura froze. "What did you just say?" Emily's lips curved into a slow, unsettling smile. "Sarah wasn't the first. She was just the one who survived. Well, her baby did." The room went silent. Laura felt her stomach twist. "You're lying," she said firmly. "You want attention." Emily shook her head slowly. "You remember the file you never opened completely? The missing woman from 3 years before Sarah? Her name was Megan Ross." Laura's eyes widened. She remembered that case, an unsolved disappearance. A pregnant woman, 8 months along, no body, no suspect. "I met her too," Emily continued. "Same way, online. She wanted to sell baby clothes. But that time, things went wrong. I panicked and ran before—" She paused, smiling faintly. "Before the baby came." Laura's pulse quickened. "Where is she, Emily? Where's Megan?" Emily tilted her head. "Buried behind my old house in Riverfield. You'll find her there. I used to visit sometimes, before David and I moved." Laura stood up abruptly, signaling to the guard. Her hands were shaking. For 5 years, they had believed Sarah Miller was the only victim. But now, it seemed the story went deeper, darker than anyone imagined. 2 days later, a search team arrived at Emily's old property in Riverfield. The backyard was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. Under a large oak tree, the ground looked uneven. They dug for hours. Then one of the officers shouted, "We found something!" A small skeleton, the remains of a woman curled as if protecting something, was lifted carefully from the dirt. Beside her lay a tiny set of bones, no bigger than a hand. It was Megan Ross. Back at the facility, Laura returned to see Emily one last time. "We found her," she said quietly. Emily smiled peacefully. "Good. Now she's not alone anymore." Laura stared at her, speechless. "Why, Emily? Why did you do this?" Emily looked up at the ceiling, her voice soft like a lullaby. "Because mothers should never be alone. Not in life. Not in death." Tears filled Laura's eyes. Not of pity, but of sorrow. For all the years chasing justice, she had forgotten something simple. Sometimes evil hides inside grief. Wearing the face of love, as she walked out of the facility, the evening sun broke through the clouds. The wind rustled the trees, whispering like a voice from the past. Behind her, in her cell, Emily hummed a lullaby, the same tune she once sang to a baby that was never hers. And for Detective Laura Hayes, the case of Emily Sanders was finally closed. But the echoes of that lullaby would haunt her forever.